Hello everyone. In this chapter we're going to look at printers and printing. We'll discuss some of the fundamentals of printing. We'll talk about laser printers and inkjet printers. We'll also talk about thermal and impact printers, how to install and configure printers, some printer maintenance, and a big one, printer troubleshooting and tools. This is an area that's very important because as you move on and you get a job in either network administration or if you start out as a tech support specialist, you're going to find that most of the problems you run into are people can't get to the internet, they can't figure out their email, or they're having trouble printing something. So being able to fix a printer problem is a very good thing that will save you a lot of time and headache. And this will add up to a big section of the A+ exam. Printer and email configuration is about 20% actually of the final questions. So some terminology to be aware of. A print device is the hardware that actually controls the ink flow. Print devices can be locally attached via USB or parallel if you're dealing with an old one. But more often than not, they're directly connected to the network, or maybe they're shared from some other computer. The printer is the software that tells the hardware how to work. The printer is generally referred to as the print driver by most people. And that software is usually OS dependent. For example, if you're printing with Linux, you need a Linux print driver. If you're printing with Windows, you're going to need a Windows print driver. The spooler is a temporary storage for print documents. It's usually found on the hard drive, but newer printers usually have their own RAM, and sometimes there is a second spooler or even a third one there to hold data as it's being printed. With some super high-end printers, they even have hard drives, and the spooler is on that hard drive. So the way that it works is when you first print something, it goes to the spooler on your computer that then feeds it to the spooler on the printer that writes it to the hard drive where it sits until ultimately it can print. And then the print queue is a folder that saves jobs until the device is ready. So the queue will hold separate jobs until they're ready to go to the spooler. There are two types of software that control print devices, firmware and then software. The firmware is what's built into the printer, and then the software again is referred to as the driver. Now you'll find that you need very specific drivers for different printers because they have different features. But in general, most of the manufacturers have some sort of generic driver that will at least get basic printing going on a printer. With most laser printers, for example, PostScript is the kind of generic driver. And the good thing about that is because it is generic, PostScript is supported off a variety of operating systems. So if your printer supports PostScript, you're going to be able to print really no matter what it is you're trying to print. So the process that happens when you print something is that the application sends a print request to the operating system. The operating system then is going to use a print queue to manage the print jobs, storing them in order in some sort of default directory or temporary directory until they're ready to be printed. When ready, the print device will receive the data from the computer through whatever interface, be it parallel, USB, or through the internet. The data stream will have commands that set the page orientation, the margins. If it's a laser printer with built-in fonts, they'll have codes to tell it what fonts to use. If the driver is correct and it sends data in a way that the printer understands, it'll print properly. If not, you'll get what they call a stream of garbage, which means just garbled characters will come out. Once the page is printed, the printer will feed the page and prepare to start on the next page. When that's complete, it will eject and start on the next page and continue until the entire document is printed. So some types of printers for you to be aware of. Laser and LED printers are kind of the most common these days. They use light rays to create images on toner. Inkjet printers are pretty popular for home use, and they have lots of tiny little nozzles that spray an exact amount of ink onto the page. Thermal printers, while not so popular at home, most of you have probably run into at least one of these. And a thermal printer prints on a special heat-sensitive paper, but it doesn't need ink. Lots of POS terminals use thermal paper because there's no need to replace ink in the printers. And then Impact are your old traditional printers. And these have moving pins that imprint image through an ink ribbon onto a piece of paper. Believe it or not, there's still lots of places where these Impact or dot matrix printers are used. Anywhere that needs carbon copy forms, for example, none of the other types of printing are Impact, so they won't push ink through to a carbon copy like a dot matrix printer will. So laser printers are similar to photocopiers. Both use basically the same idea. They use toner that can be heated to create the image and roller-based paper paths for the paper to work through. The differences they point out here, and I want to make sure you know this is what they'll want for the exam, but it's really not so much the case anymore, is that laser printers are digital and copiers are analog. The reason I say that's not so much the case anymore is that what you're going to find is most copiers now are digital copiers. And for the higher end copiers that you might use in business, it might be a copier slash scanner slash printer. So it's possible that you'll have one device that you'll do all of this with. Laser printers used to use higher temperatures than copiers to bond the toner, but again, that's kind of changing. And LED and lasers are the same process, they just use different light sources. A laser printer uses an actual laser, where an LED uses an LED light. So the process for laser printing, this is a 7-step process, and I expect you to see this on the A+ exam. So what you really need to do is just kind of memorize this. The first is processing. The printer receives data from the print driver and stores it in the memory. Conditioning. The drum is conditioned to get ready to take an image. Then during stage 3, the exposure, the image is written on the drum. In the developing stage, ink is put onto the drum. Then in the transfer stage, it's transferred to the paper. Finally, in the fusing stage, that paper is heated up and that toner is melted onto the paper. And then in the cleaning stage, the previous page from the processing stage is removed or discharged so that processing can start again, or rather conditioning can start again for the image to be written. Here we have just an example showing the laser printer operation. This is with a monochrome or a single color laser printer. Here we see the same thing with multicolor ink. And I really shouldn't say ink because even though we call it that, it's actually toner. You'll see here that the same process occurs. You just go through each of the different toner cartridges to get the toner over onto the paper. So one thing about laser printers that makes them a little bit different from some of these other types is that a laser printer has to print a whole page at a time. With inkjets and with dot matrix printers, they don't need a lot of memory because they can print a single line and then ask the computer to send them more data to print the next line. That's not possible, so laser printers need RAM in order to hold a print job. If the whole job will not fit in the printer at one time, your only really solutions are to add more RAM or to reduce the size of the print job. And the way you do that is by reducing the resolution, reduce the size of photo images. If it's color, convert it to black and white. And they suggest that you do not reduce it to anything less than 600 dpi, or dots per inch. So toner cartridges contain the little plastic powdered pellets that are melted onto the paper. And I think this is one of the best pieces of advice that you'll find in all of these slides. 80% of problems with laser printers can be fixed by replacing the cartridge. If it's printing weird, if it's not printing right, if it's printing with a line on it, the first thing you should do is try putting another cartridge in, especially if you've got one that you can try that with. So the cartridges are light sensitive. They need to be kept in a dark place, either inside the printer or keep them in the protective packaging. Don't open them until you need them. Most come with a cleaning tool to keep the reflective mirror clean. And 80% of what happens on a printer actually happens inside of this cartridge. They also say use paper specifically made for laser printing. That very, very, very especially applies to labels and envelopes. If you put inkjet labels through a laser printer, the laser printer gets hot, the inkjet doesn't. Those labels are not made to adhere to the paper at a high temperature. And what will happen is they'll come off inside your printer and you will have a mess on your hands. Sometimes you'll get those labels in there and you can't get them out. You've basically just destroyed the printer. So inkjet printers are also sometimes called ink dispersion printers, and they're popular with residentials and small businesses. If you don't print a lot, they're good. If you're going to print a significant amount, laser printers become cheaper, but inkjet printers are normally cheaper to buy. They use tightly spaced nozzles to spray dots of ink onto the paper, and they print one line at a time. They come in a variety of different things, and they say CMYK as far as the colors. Some will come with that, but you'll see that different ones have different color mechanisms. Some older HP printers, for example, will use RGB colors. Some will have one color ink cartridge and one black and white. Some will have cartridges for every individual color. My personal preference is the ones that have a color for every individual color have a cartridge, because if you buy the one that has a combined cartridge and you run out of one color, you've wasted the other ink. And ink for these printers is not cheap. Here they're giving an example, and this one has 6 ink cartridges. So what you'll find in this one, and I can't really tell from the picture, but it looks like it might have 6 colors. Some will have black plus 3 colors plus 4 colors, where the 4 are photo quality color and the original 3 are just colors for everyday use. And this printer, if you see here on number 7, has a flash memory card reader, so you can put the memory card of your camera in and actually print directly on the printer. So the inkjet print process is a little bit different. Paper is pulled into position by a roller. The print head moves across the paper, dropping the ink as directed by the driver. At the end of the line, the paper is advanced and the print head reverses direction or continues to print. If you're in high-speed mode, it's going to print in both directions. If you're in more letter quality mode, it's probably going to print in one direction. At the end of the page, it will eject the page and then start on the next one. So inkjet cartridges, there are some things you can do to keep your printer in good maintenance. The cartridge nozzles become clogged. Some printers have a self-cleaning feature. You can use that. If not, take the print head off and soak it in warm, shallow water. They say use the printer power button, shut down the printer. The reason that's important is that this ink will dry over time, and you want to make sure that it moves the print head back over into a position in the corner where there's actually a little stopper that'll come up and touch the bottom of the cartridges. That keeps it from running out or from the ink being exposed to the air so that it dries out. The print heads can become misaligned. If that happens, use the self-alignment feature. They don't say it here, but something that I suggest if your print heads are clogged is to clean them with a little bit of rubbing alcohol, because that rubbing alcohol will dry very quickly, and that will normally help with any issues you have. And if you're going to use refillable cartridges, if you're going to refill them yourself, you'll save some money, but that invalidates the warranty on most inkjet printers, so don't do that until after your warranty is expired. Another type of printer you may run into is a thermal printer. And thermal printers are mainly used in checkout machines to print receipts. You might find old thermal fax machines around in some places. Some will actually use a wax to print onto a page. It's important to choose the right paper if you're using a thermal printer. You need paper that works for a thermal printer. So impact printers are the traditional dot matrix printers. These use pins to strike through a ribbon to print onto paper. These often use that tractor-fed paper that we all call computer paper that you've seen before. There are two different types, 9-pin and 24-pin. 9 is usually a draft mode and is faster. 24-pin creates what's called near letter quality. And one thing to be aware of is that these get hot to the touch, so be careful if you're working on one of these. The print head gets very hot. Here they're just showing an example of where to go to install a printer. In Windows 7, you go to View Devices and Printers and hit Add a Device. Some things that you'll generally set. There are, under the General page, a Print Test button. If you've just installed a print driver for the first time, you can click on the print test and see if you get a page that looks proper. Sharing enables you to share that printer over the network to other computers. This is especially important for home users as they may only have one printer for 3 or 4 computers. Ports will list the ports and the way to attach to the printer via the network. Then advanced, you'll have settings where you can tell it what type of paper. If your printer has more than one bay for paper, you tell it which bay you're going to print from. You'll also have some device settings and color management options. Here they're showing just an example of printer properties. With this, this is an inkjet printer, an Epson stylus. They're not showing it here, but under ink levels, printers are bidirectional generally now, so they will reply back to the software to say that we're out of ink or that we need a specific color. So there are several things you can do to optimize your printer performance. One thing is to make sure that you have enough RAM to accommodate the print jobs. If there's updated firmware for your printer, you might run it. It might add features. Generally, they say set the spooler to automatic. Let the software and the printer figure out the spooler on their own instead of trying to set it. And if you have more than one source of paper, like I said earlier, make sure you pick the proper source. So there are several different ways that printers can interface into computers. One way is by USB. That's used in lots of home printers and in these multifunction units where you get a printer, scanner, copier. Parallel is the old legacy type. And if you remember in some of the previous videos, I told you what that connection looks like. That's your Centronics port or your parallel port. RS-232 or serial is used with some impact printers. Some lasers use it. Some of the very small printers that you see in restaurants use it because there's not a lot of data going through them. SCSI, you would find a few high-end PostScript printers that use SCSI. Bluetooth and infrared are used by some things. Ethernet is pretty common now, and wireless Ethernet, because once you've got a printer on the network, then anybody can print to it. And while not very popular, you will occasionally find printers that have FireWire, which is also the IEEE 1394 interfaces. So in Windows 7, to share a printer, go to your control panel, Network and Sharing, and select Printer Sharing. Thinking about our troubleshooting process, the way that it applies to a printer, first identify the problem. Think about the symptoms and review the error code. See what you're getting. Establish a theory of probable cause. Start with simple and go with complex. If the printer says it's out of paper, the first thing you should look for is to see if the printer is actually out of paper. Utilize the manufacturer's knowledge bases. If you're having a weird issue with a printer, look on the manufacturer's website and see if other people are having that weird issue. There may be answers. Test your theory to determine the cause. Print the test page to test the driver. If it's a laser printer, print the power on self-test to test the device itself. Establish a plan to solve your problem. Verify the functionality and then document it. So when you are removing a printer, there are a couple of ways to do it. In Windows, you can actually just go to the hardware list and hit delete on a printer, and that will take the printer out of the system. But it's really not recommended you do that because that won't delete the spooler. If there were unprinted jobs, they will just take up temporary files and sit there on your hard drive forever. So if you go to add remove hardware and remove it that way, it will actually remove the DLL driver files and the print spooler. So in summary, we talked about some printing fundamentals. We talked about printer and scanner control, what drivers, firmware, and firmware are. We talked about print processes. Make sure you review that for the A+ exam. In printer installation, make sure you know how to add and remove a printer. And then we talked about some printer troubleshooting techniques. Thanks for watching, everyone.